The sun hadn't yet warmed the frost-kissed earth of Willow Creek when Charlie, the retired canine golden retriever, began barking at grave 39. He had never done that before, not for the mourning families, not for the wild deer that sometimes slipped past the gates at dawn, but this morning. Something stirred beneath the soil, something wrong. The old dog circled the fresh mound with anxious steps, his nose trembling. Sam, the caretaker, leaned on his rake, puzzled. "There ain't supposed to be anyone buried there," he muttered. Charlie barked louder, sharper, refusing to stop. Not even the dead could silence him. Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments? And if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you, please give this video a like and consider subscribing. The wind had a bite that morning in Willow Creek, Tennessee, a crisp snap of early autumn cutting through the quiet dawn. Fog lingered low over the grassy knolls of Willow Creek Memorial Cemetery, and the orange glow of the rising sun barely pierced the canopy of aging oak trees lining the southern edge of the grounds. Dew clung stubbornly to marble headstones, and the scent of wet earth and cold granite hung in the air like a heavy veil. In the center of the grounds, a modest maintenance cottage stood nestled between two rows of hedges. There, inside the worn wooden porch, lay Charlie, a 9-year-old golden retriever with a silvered muzzle, and a heart that hadn't aged a day since his time in the K-9 search and rescue unit. His thick golden coat had thinned slightly with the years, and one ear drooped lower than the other, a remnant from an avalanche rescue gone wrong in Montana 6 winters ago. He bore a gentle soul, but behind those kind amber eyes burned a soldier's vigilance, the kind that never truly retired. Charlie lived with Sam Whitaker, the cemetery's head groundskeeper. Sam was a wiry man in his late 50s, his frame bent slightly from years of digging, raking, and trimming. His skin was weathered like old cedar, his hands always calloused, and his smile, though rare, was warm when it came. Sam had once served as a combat medic in the Gulf War, but rarely spoke of it. Save for the scar that ran behind his left ear and a well-worn silver flask he never actually drank from. He preferred the company of the dead, and perhaps, even more, the company of Charlie that morning. Sam was out on his usual sunrise patrol, a ritual he'd kept for 15 years. Charlie, however, was not at his side. Instead, the dog was standing rigid near a row of newly placed stones at the northern end. Section D, his posture tense, his tail stiff, his eyes locked on one unassuming grave. He barked sharply, a deep-chested cry that echoed through the cold air like an alarm bell. Then again, there was no rhythm to it, only urgency. Sam turned sharply from the path he was sweeping and squinted toward the noise. "Charlie," he called, his voice hoarse with early morning. When the dog didn't move but instead barked louder, Sam felt a tug of something he hadn't felt in years. Unease. The grave Charlie was fixated on bore a simple plaque. Michael J., October 2nd, 2023. No last name, no flowers, just the name and a date. Sam blinked at it. That was yesterday's date, frowning. Sam flipped through the worn brown ledger he kept clipped to his belt. Each page was handwritten meticulously. Name, plot, ceremony time, family contact. He flipped back and forth. No Michael J., not on October 2nd, not ever. He approached Charlie cautiously. The dog's ears were pinned back now, his nose twitching as he sniffed furiously at the base of the grave. Then he began to dig, soft at first, then frantically, flinging cold soil behind him. "Whoa now," Sam muttered. kneeling beside him and pulling gently at his collar. "You're gonna wreck the place. You hear something?" Charlie paused only briefly to whine, turning his eyes to Sam in a way that said more than barking ever could. Sam hesitated a moment longer, then did something he hadn't done in over a decade. He pulled the old police-issued radio from the shelf inside his cottage and clicked it on. "Dispatch. This is Sam Whitaker at Willow Creek. I need to speak with Officer Grace Taylor. Tell her it's about Charlie. Urgent." Grace Taylor had once been a rising star at the Knoxville Police Department before transferring back to her hometown of Willow Creek 3 years ago after her brother's death in a hit-and-run. Since then, she had been quiet, efficient, and emotionally distant, a wall with a badge. Grace was 30 with a tall, athletic build and a scar running through her left brow from a domestic call gone wrong. Her hair was tied back in a no-nonsense ponytail, and she wore her badge like armor. She trusted few, but Charlie had been one of the few exceptions when Grace arrived 15 minutes later. She stepped out of her cruiser without a word and knelt beside Charlie, who immediately pressed his head against her knee. "What's he doing here?" she asked, her voice low but sharp as a knife. Sam handed her the ledger, flipped open to the current week. "That grave shouldn't be there," he said. "I walked this section 2 days ago. It was empty." Grace read the entry. She looked up at the headstone. No record, no last name, no service logged. She rose slowly and walked a circle around the grave, her boots leaving shallow prints in the morning dew. He was trained to detect life. She murmured, "Buried survivors, wounded soldiers, even kids under rubble. He's never done this without reason." Sam crossed his arms. "I've seen him bark at raccoons. This ain't that." Charlie barked again, this time loud enough to echo against the chapel walls on the far side of the cemetery. Then he pawed the grave harder. Grace pulled out her phone. "I'm calling it in." As the fog began to lift, revealing the first full light of day, Charlie lay down beside the grave, his head on his paws, but his eyes sharp, unblinking, never left the stone. Something was down there, and Charlie wasn't going to let anyone walk away from it. Grace stood just beyond the grave's edge, the morning chill clinging to her collar. Her breath steamed in the crisp Tennessee air as her fingers flew across the keyboard of the rugged police-issued tablet. Willow Creek's cemetery database was notoriously outdated, but she knew every loophole, every place someone might slip through the cracks. She tapped in coordinates and cross-referenced burial permits for the last 2 weeks. Nothing. Not a whisper of a Michael J. Grace's brow furrowed. Charlie sat nearby, his golden coat dappled with dirt, his nose twitching toward the earth. His body trembled, not from the cold, but from something else, something closer to dread. Grace had seen him like this once before, in the aftermath of a collapsed parking garage downtown. He'd alerted to a survivor who'd been buried under steel beams and concrete. They had saved her, but barely. She turned to Sam, who had returned with a heavy canvas tarp and a stainless steel thermos of coffee. He set the thermos down beside her, not speaking. Sam's face looked more hollow than usual, like the frost had carved deeper lines into the already weathered planes of his cheeks. "I'm calling in the judge," Grace said. "This is past protocol now." Sam gave a short nod. "About time." He eyed the grave. "I've seen caskets buried quiet before, never ones that barking dogs tried to dig up." By noon, the emergency order had gone through. The judge, an old colleague of Grace's father, had approved the exhumation under one condition: that an official from county forensics be present. That man arrived just after 1 o'clock, driving an old white Jeep that coughed smoke as it rolled to a stop near the chapel. Lucas Breyer stepped out, a broad-shouldered, bespectacled man in his early 40s with thinning blonde hair and a meticulously neat goatee. He wore the grave solemnity of someone who'd seen too much and forgot how to sleep because of it. Lucas was known for being methodical, precise, and stubbornly thorough. He had a quiet disposition, though his eyes darted constantly, missing nothing. He greeted Grace with a curt nod. "Heard you've got a barking ghost." "Not quite," she replied, motioning to Charlie. "Just an old partner who knows when something's not right." Lucas crouched beside the grave, running a gloved hand over the soil, disturbed. He murmured, "But not like your average backhoe. Whoever buried this did it by hand, recently. Less than 48 hours. Sam confirmed. "This patch was clear Monday. Then let's see what secrets your cemetery's hiding." It took nearly 2 hours to carefully remove the soil. Charlie refused to move from his post. His ears perked, breath shallow, as the shovel hit metal. A hush fell over the group. The forensics team exchanged glances. Lucas knelt and brushed away the remaining dirt, revealing the top of a sleek, matte black coffin, modern, expensive, out of place. The latches clicked. Inside was a boy, barely a man, curled and bound at the wrists and ankles. His face was pale and streaked with dirt, duct tape torn unevenly across his mouth. But the chest beneath his dark hoodie rose and fell, weakly, miraculously. Grace's breath caught. "Get him out, now!" The forensics team moved with choreographed urgency. Within seconds, the duct tape was peeled away, binding snipped, oxygen was administered, the boy's fingers twitched. Charlie let out a low whine, his body shuddering from nose to tail. Sam knelt beside him and whispered, "Good boy, you did it," as paramedics arrived to take over. Grace finally had a moment to study the boy's face. Dirt clung to the creases around his closed eyes. He couldn't have been older than 21. Then a flash of memory struck. Grace pulled out her phone, opening an old case file from a fire investigation 7 months ago. She held the image beside the boy's resting face. "Eli Cross," she said. Almost in disbelief, he was presumed dead. Explosion at his father's compound. There was a funeral. Sam squinted. Then what the hell is he doing here before anyone could answer? Charlie growled, a low, cautious sound, and pawed at the edge of the casket again. Lucas leaned in to inspect the area beneath the body and paused. There's something under the lining. He carefully peeled back the velvet upholstery and retrieved a flat, wrapped object sealed in thick plastic. It was a USB drive, waterproof, industrial grade. Lucas examined it under the light. This isn't something you'd buy at a corner store. This is military tech. Grace's gut twisted. We need to secure this, now. As the ambulance doors slammed shut and carried Eli toward County Medical, Grace stood motionless for a moment, one hand on Charlie's head. She looked out across the rows of graves, suddenly realizing that the silence here wasn't peace. It was warning. Rain fell steadily over Willow Creek, soaking the once crisp leaves into mushy clumps along the cemetery paths. Inside the chapel-turned investigation post, the atmosphere was heavy, not with grief, but with revelation. Grace sat hunched over a folding table inside the back room of the chapel. Her hands were tight around a sealed evidence bag, the USB drive inside glinting faintly under the overhead light. Across from her, Lucas Breyer carefully unfolded a set of thermal printouts. He had spent the last hour running diagnostics through the department's secure decryption software, despite the aging tech. Something had finally cracked. There's something here, Lucas said, eyes narrowing. Heavily encrypted, military grade. But I managed to isolate a block of metadata that references an entity called Spectres. Grace leaned forward. Spectres, Lucas nodded. Not a person, a group, possibly an acronym. But the files aren't just names and numbers. They're executable code fragments of a security architecture that looks alarmingly familiar. He pulled another sheet from the printer and laid it flat. It was a schematic. Grace stared at it, her pulse quickening. There it was. The signature of Crosstech embedded into the code, subtle, disguised, but unmistakable. Ryan Cross, she said aloud. This is his software. Lucas tapped a highlighted line of text, specifically. One of his older security frameworks, an adaptive firewall called Helix Shell. Only ever used in banking infrastructure. And from what I can tell, this group, Spectres, found a way to reverse engineer it. Grace felt a chill run through her veins. They're not breaking in. They're rewriting the lock with the locksmith's own key. Outside, Charlie sat beneath the overhang, eyes fixed on the misty graveyard beyond. His fur was damp, but he didn't move. He remained there like a sentinel, a golden silhouette against the shadows of headstones. Grace glanced at him through the chapel window. The dog hadn't left the grave since they'd pulled Eli out. He could feel it. Something about this place wasn't right. As Lucas continued scanning the fragmented data, Grace turned her attention to a second file recovered from the USB, a digital map. It showed topography lines and soil density readings. At first glance, it appeared to be a geological survey, but then she saw the legend, buried beneath the cemetery, threading like invisible veins, was a dense network of fiber optic lines, bundled, shielded, and recent, far too recent for a quiet hilltop cemetery in rural Tennessee. This isn't just a burial ground, Grace muttered. It's a hub. Lucas looked up. What she pointed, these are access points. They match the crypts, the chapel, even your maintenance shed. Whoever planted Eli didn't just pick a hiding spot, they picked the control room. The realization hit hard. The chapel's isolation, the outdated infrastructure, the lack of surveillance, all perfect conditions to hide a digital relay. Grace's throat tightened. Do you think Ryan knew Lucas asked? I don't know, she answered. But if he didn't, someone close to him did. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the hum of the old heater and the steady tap of rain. Then the past came roaring back. Grace closed her eyes and saw the hallway, the one from 2 years ago, the night of the hostage situation. Her partner, Officer Lena Vargas, had been the first to breach. Grace had hesitated, just a heartbeat, trusting a gut instinct that the suspect was bluffing. But the man wasn't. He'd pulled the trigger. Lena hadn't made it. And Grace had never forgiven herself for the pause. She opened her eyes again, her hands clenched. This time, she wouldn't hesitate, not if lives were on the line, not if the same instincts were telling her now that Spectres wasn't just a ghost in the machine. It was real, and it had chosen Willow Creek for a reason, from outside. Charlie let out a low growl. The wind whipped through the broken rafters of the old chapel, sending brittle leaves spiraling across the dusty floorboards. The building had once stood as a quiet place of mourning on the northern ridge of Willow Creek Cemetery. But decades of neglect had turned it into a ruin, a hollow shell of memory with stained glass windows cracked and dulled by time. Grace stood at the threshold, flashlight in one hand, the other resting instinctively on the grip of her sidearm. Charlie stood beside her, nose twitching, body taut. He had led her here without hesitation, his pace urgent, as if pulled by something he couldn't see but could feel deep in his bones. "This place gives me the creeps," muttered Sam from behind, clutching an old metal toolbox. His frame was tense despite the familiarity of the cemetery grounds. The dim glow from Grace's flashlight revealed the lined tension on his face, the subtle downturn of his mouth. Sam had fought wars, buried the dead, and outlived both. But this was new. They moved cautiously through the chapel's main hall until Charlie stopped suddenly at the altar, sniffing hard at the base of the stone lectern. Grace crouched and traced the dust-covered wood until her fingers caught on something, an indentation almost invisible in the grain. She pressed it, and a faint mechanical click echoed beneath the floor. The trapdoor that opened was older than the chapel itself. Beneath it, a narrow staircase descended into shadow. Flashlights swept the corridor below. The walls were cold stone, reinforced with modern fiber paneling, an odd juxtaposition. Wires, neatly bound and labeled, snaked along the ceiling, at the far end of the passage. A steel door stood slightly ajar. Inside, Grace's light revealed rows of server racks humming faintly. The air was cold and dry, artificially maintained. "This isn't just a hideout," Sam muttered. "It's a control center." Grace approached a workstation mounted to the wall. A terminal linked sleepily when she tapped a key. A schematic loaded, one she had seen in fragments before on the USB, but now fully rendered. It mapped out not just the current facility but another, labeled Node 2, Standby, located somewhere on the southern edge of town. "This is just one node," she said. "There's another coming online soon, behind her." Charlie let out a low growl. Grace turned just in time to see a figure stepping into the room. Detective Miles Tanner, one of the newer additions to the county's investigation team, paused in the doorway. He was in his late 30s, broad-shouldered and clean-shaven, with neatly cropped black hair and an ever-present sense of discipline in his posture. His voice was usually soft, measured, and respectful. A former Marine turned detective. He'd been assigned to the Willow Creek Division 6 months prior and had quickly earned trust with his quiet efficiency. But right now, his eyes were too wide, his hand hovered near his belt, and something about the way he scanned the room set off alarm bells in Grace's mind. "How did you find us?" she asked evenly. "Tracked your radio ping," he replied. "Had it synced with dispatch after the Eli case went live?" Charlie growled louder, stepping in front of Grace. "Stand down, Tanner," Sam said, but Tanner didn't flinch. His eyes flicked to the terminal behind Grace, then back to her. "That's classified data," he said. "You shouldn't be in here." Grace drew her weapon, "And you shouldn't know it exists." Tanner exhaled, hands raising slowly, but the calm was artificial. Grace recognized the tactic. Stalling. She'd seen it before in interrogation rooms, just before the moment everything went sideways. "You're not local," she said. "Who do you report to?" Before he could answer, Charlie lunged, not to attack, but to intercept. A small device had fallen from Tanner's sleeve. A black capsule with a blinking red LED. "EMP," Sam muttered, recognizing the casing. Grace kicked it across the room as it began to spark. Too late. The lights flickered, and the terminal screens died. A low hum of power vanished, replaced by silence. Tanner bolted. Charlie gave chase, his nails skidding on the stone floor. Grace and Sam followed, sprinting up the stairwell as Tanner slammed through the rotted chapel doors into the storm outside. But the dog was faster, in the downpour. Grace caught up just as Charlie forced Tanner to the ground, his jaws snapping inches from the man's face. "I was following orders," Tanner shouted, soaked and shivering. From who Grace demanded. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, something flickered, fear, guilt, perhaps regret. "It's bigger than you think. You're already too late." Node 2 comes online at dawn, back at the chapel's basement. Grace and Sam returned to find the servers slowly rebooting on reserve power. The EMP had wiped volatile memory, but left the hard drives intact. They had only minutes before the backup routine triggered a data wipe. Grace moved fast, pulling an auxiliary drive from her satchel and plugging into the terminal. One directory caught her eye. Gatekeeper Protocol XC. She copied it, just then. Her phone buzzed. It was the hospital. Eli had regained consciousness. She arrived at County General 20 minutes later, hair still damp from the rain, mud on her boots. Eli Cross lay in a dim recovery room, monitors beeping steadily. His skin was pale, but his eyes were open and alert. "You found it," he rasped. "The chapel." Grace nodded. "And the node, we know about specters." His voice was hoarse, but his mind was clear. They don't just want control, they want erasure, financial records, government data, citizenship rolls, all scrubbed clean. Gatekeeper was my failsafe, a way to shut them down if anything ever went live. Grace leaned in. "How do we use it?" He looked at her, a spark of urgency behind the fatigue. Node 2 isn't just a backup. It's the upload point if it activates. The gatekeeper won't matter. You have to find it before the sunrise. The horizon was just beginning to glow. A soft bruise of lavender and burnt orange over the Tennessee hills, but for Grace Taylor, the dawn brought no promise of peace, only urgency. The air outside Willow Creek trembled with cold and silence, as if the world was holding its breath. Grace crouched beneath a thicket of brambles at the southern edge of town, eyes locked on a slab of stone embedded in the hillside. It looked like part of the terrain, mossy, unremarkable, but the elevation matched the coordinates on the stolen schematic from the chapel's server. Beside her, Charlie lay low, panting softly, his golden fur matted with mud. His left front paw had been bandaged earlier, after tearing it while chasing Tanner the day before, but it hadn't dulled his focus. If anything, he was more alert now, more attuned, behind them. Eli Cross emerged from the overgrown brush. He still moved like a man recovering from weeks of sedation. Thin, slightly hunched, but his eyes had cleared. There was fire in them again. He wore a dark hoodie borrowed from the hospital and a backpack containing his laptop, cables, and the Gatekeeper Protocol, though barely 21. Eli carried the haunted look of someone twice his age. It was the kind of gaze that came from surviving something you were never supposed to see. "You sure this is it?" Grace asked, whispering. Eli nodded, tapping his screen. Spectres designated this as Node 2. They plan to use it to upload a mirrored control matrix to every major financial data center simultaneously. Grace exhaled. Then we can't afford to be wrong. They moved fast. Sam was already ahead, having pried open a forgotten service hatch into an abandoned waterway that ran beneath the ridge. Grace had called in no one else. She didn't trust anyone but these two anymore. The tunnel was pitch black, narrow, damp. Charlie led the way, his nose twitching at each junction. Eli followed close behind, pausing to tag signal interference points on his device. Every few yards, Grace would shine her light across the concrete walls, faint scorch marks, subtle reinforcements, new fiber optic lines that didn't belong to any city registry. Spectres had been here recently. They reached a large underground chamber about the size of a barn. It had once been a municipal water control hub, but now servers pulsed with eerie blue light, humming like a sleeping dragon. At the center, a black cylindrical unit sat embedded into the floor, 6 antennae extended from it, each glowing faintly. The uplink device, Charlie's growl was low, sustained. "That's the signal hub. Eli whispered. "If it connects, it'll deploy the code in under 30 seconds. Grace scanned the perimeter. A movement near the back wall caught her eye. A man stood near one of the servers, a gun holstered but visible, typing something rapidly on a touchscreen interface. Silas Boone, early 40s, stocky frame, ex-military posture, bald with a trimmed gray beard. Grace had seen him once in a Homeland cyber briefing in D.C. years ago. He'd been with an intelligence division so covert they didn't even wear insignia. Now, he was here. Boone looked up, as if he'd expected her. "You're too late," he said simply. "Back away from the console," Grace ordered. Raising her weapon, "You have no idea what you're standing on," he said. "This isn't just about money. This is about survival, erasing the rot. That rot includes every Social Security file, every hospital record, every pension." Eli snapped. "You're not saving the world, you're wiping it." Boone smirked. "We had to build something new, burn the foundation to set the next layer. Your father understood." Grace's finger tightened on the trigger. "Step away, now!" Charlie barked, lunging forward, not attacking, but signaling. His paw scraped urgently at the far wall. Grace hesitated, then looked. Behind a cluster of cable spools, partially concealed, was a backup terminal. A secondary trigger. Boone moved. Eli tackled the console, pulling a portable drive from his pack and jamming it into the port. The gatekeeper protocol launched. Lines of code raced down the screen. Boone charged, reaching for Eli. Charlie leapt between them, teeth flashing, growl guttural. Boone stumbled backward, falling into the cables. Grace fired a warning shot. "It's over." Eli turned. Upload halted. Data neutralized. Sirens wailed in the distance. Sam had activated the emergency beacon once the uplink went down. Reinforcements were coming. Boone dropped to his knees, shoulders sagging, the fire gone from his eyes. Later that morning, the town awoke to headlines it never expected. The Spectre's network was exposed, its nodes dismantled. Boone was in federal custody, Tanner, too. The FBI confirmed that the entire system had been quietly feeding into a shadow ledger, a financial mirror intended to rewrite global wealth in a matter of minutes. Grace stood quietly outside the now secured Node 2 facility, sipping burnt station coffee. She watched as Charlie limped across the gravel path, still proud, still alert. Children from town had come to leave dog biscuits near the chapel that day, unaware of what they were honoring, just knowing, somehow, that the big golden dog had done something good. Later that week, Ryan Cross appeared at Willow Creek in person. He was in his late 50s, tall, sharp-featured, silver hair neatly combed, dressed not like a tech CEO but like a father humbled. He met Grace near the chapel. "I don't have words," he said quietly. "Only intentions." He announced the funding of a national K-9 training and recovery center to be built just outside of town. It would be called the Charlie Initiative, a place to retrain retired service dogs for community service and therapy work. As the press swarmed, Grace stepped away. She didn't need the spotlight. She just watched as Charlie, still bandaged but happy, sat near a small marble plaque already mounted at the chapel gate. It read, "Every bark matters, especially the ones we choose to listen to. Sometimes. The greatest miracles are not thunderclaps from the sky or parting seas. They come quietly, wrapped in fur, walking on four paws, and barking just when we need it most, in a world increasingly controlled by technology and hidden agendas." It was a loyal heart, a wounded paw, and a sense of purpose that helped bring the truth to light. Charlie didn't just save Eli, he saved an entire system from being rewritten in darkness. And perhaps that's how God works, not always in grand displays, but in faithful acts of courage, loyalty, and timing that no human could orchestrate alone. It was no accident that Charlie led Grace to that forgotten chapel. No accident he stood guard when others faltered. So, if you've ever doubted your purpose, or felt too small in the face of chaos, remember Charlie. And remember, God often uses the quiet, the broken, and the overlooked to carry out His greatest plans. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment below and type Amen if you believe that loyalty, faith, and courage can still change the world. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us. Heroes come in many forms, and may God bless every viewer who joined us in this journey.